Des Kenny, you're very welcome to the Script to Story podcast series. It's great to have you. You're always a wonderful man to know about Galway. One member of the Kenny family, which is synonymous with the Kenny's Bookshop in Galway. And I think everybody knows Kenny's Bookshop in Ireland. You're the man to talk to about all things literature. So,
well, most things literature.
Most things literature. Okay. So what we were talking in this podcast season, we're talking about the Irish language in both literature and culture, and a lot of people have left the language and they're trying to come back to it again. And you know, we learned it up to Leaving Cert, and then we walked away, and now we're trying to come back to it again. We're trying to find a way back. You know, we're sending our children to Gael School and so on, but we're trying to find a way back into the Irish language.
Are we talking about people who are living in Ireland or people who are living outside of Ireland?
Either or.
Going on our earlier conversation, which we just had, it was a stark similarity between the situation we were talking about and the experience I had with French.
Okay, yeah.
I speak fluent French. I was in Paris for 3 years. And I was lucky enough to have a teacher who, strange enough, was from the Chantal in Galway, but had an excellent French accent, which I picked up from him. And because of that, when I speak French with French people, they think I am French. But at the beginning, it was far from that. And I was I got over in October. I was starting to work on the master's thesis, which was in French, in Irish, and in English.
Wow.
And I was dealing with Guy de Maupassant in French, short stories of Sean O'Phelan in English, and Parikul Asquilge. And but I discovered that I was doing nothing about my French speech, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I had no friends. I had nothing. I lived 7 floors up. I would go on toilet to the whole row and all the rest of it, one cold tap. But I had a table, and I had a small little transistor. It was the only outside world thing I had. So what I learned and what I did was I used to go to my room at 1 o'clock every day, put on the French news, play patience, and not listen. And strangely enough, within 4 or 5 weeks, I was fluent. Now, I had the backup French to do it, but the fact that I was listening, what would happen is I'd understand a word. And then maybe 5 minutes later, I get 2 words. And then that grew into sentences and then paragraphs. And then I get a whole story and I would understand exactly what the presenter was saying. It was a curious exam. And I knew very shortly after that I could speak French when I started dreaming in French. Now, what I have suggested to many people who are trying to learn the Irish language, particularly those who had some grounding in it from much earlier, is one of the best things you can do is put on reading the Gaeltacht and not listen. Don't listen. Just let the language go up and down beside you. And if you have had some experience of the Irish language, you'll be surprised after a while how much you actually will begin to understand and speak yourself. And from there, the confidence to do it. It's remarkable. It was just language. I mean, you got to remember how we learned languages ourselves as human beings. We learned from our parents the sounds they made or the sounds that were in the house we were living in. We learned from that. And that's the only way we had. We had no other thing to touch off. We had nobody telling us you have to say it this way, you have to say it that way. You did it ourselves. And if you can throw your mindset back into that sort of a situation, and if you have a grow and you wish to love the language or you wish to learn the language, you will then have a positive attitude towards what you're listening to, and eventually it will come. Well, I wouldn't force it.
People often say when you're trying to speak a particular language or forget another language, like if you want to speak Irish, don't think of English. Just try and get into the flow of the Irish language or the French language or the German language, whichever it is. You know, What would you say about that?
Well, again, radio will do this for you. If you're not, if you don't listen, you just put your mind in what I call neutral. Put your mind into neutral, and just sit back and do something stupid like play patience. Or iron the shirts, something like that, something that's a chore or something, and put the radio on beside you. God only knows what you're listening to. You don't know. But eventually it'll happen. Like it happens to children. It's a natural progression if you're willing to open your mind to it. You know, it's a fascinating experience. I couldn't believe it myself when I was doing it. When I started in Paris, I thought, sure, I speak French, no problem. I heard 2 porters speaking French in Gare du Nord, and that's what I did. I had to start from all over. It was a long and painful process, but it wasn't. Once I started to listen to that radio, I have to say it was pure magic.
And just as an interesting, I'm interested in this now. Just as a question to you, do you go back to France much? How do
I
you maintain the
we
language, the fluency yourself?
That's a very good question because I haven't been in Paris now. Or I haven't been in France for maybe 2 or 3 years. And I remember there was one particular point, maybe about 15 years ago, when a French television program asked me to go over there and to do a piece on Ireland with a group of people on French television. It was a cable television. And they wanted me to go out that morning, fly out that morning from Galway, fly to Paris, do the piece, and fly back to Galway that night. I said, no. If I'm going on to television or radio like that, I need a night in a cafe. I need to get back
Get
in
your
there to
ear back
listen
in.
get
Yeah,
the ear back
yeah.
into the road and get my own voice. And even now, I have a friend of mine who is very, very ill in Paris, and I ring them ever so often. And I find that it takes me about 5-10 minutes to find the rhythm. And even then, I'm missing words and missing phrases and what have you. So you do need to keep in touch with it, yes, by all means. And that's why radio is such a wonderful gift from that point of view. And radio people, no more than what I hope we are doing here, is talking naturally across the fire, an open fire, and chatting away. And if you can handle the language that way, then go to the books.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned translations there in your earlier on.
Yeah, Ross is doing a master's he's at the end of his master's now in translation. And he's translating one of our books from English to Irish here in Tribes Press. And
Right.
Ross will be able to tell you a little bit more about that.
Well, the curious thing about that, you do remember, Ross, the Oncún translations?
Yes. The scene that Oncún out in the 30s, yes?
Yes, that's right, in the 30s and the 40s, where the writers were, and they were all the major literary writers of the time, and they were paid so much per page, or so much per paragraph, is my memory. Well, what they did actually, despite the kind of artificial way of doing it, they actually did a very, very good job, because the translations are extremely good in terms of the literature itself. And they're also doing things like the classics, like Charles Dickens, etc., etc. And these were done for years, and they were done by famous Irish writers like Joseph McGree, etc., etc. And they are a very, very good starting point. Now, the only problem that you might have with them is that they're in the old Gaeilge, Sean Gaeilge. The speech is different. When you got the Shavis and the Fathers and all that, but it's still a very, very good foundation stone. Unfortunately, they're not in print anymore. But if you do come across one or two of them, it's enough. It's a good start.
So if I have gone through the English system in school, I now want to send my children to Gaelscoil, whatever Gaelscoil you choose in your area, whether it's in Dublin, Galway, Cork, or Limerick, or wherever you are in the country, there are Gaelscoilnas to be found, because there's an explosion of them at the moment. There's such an interest in the Irish language, or return to the Irish language, and so I want to help them with their homework, and I want to read some stories to them at night, and I want to try and do a little bit in Irish, but I don't have the confidence. Radio.
Listen to Trish Ford for 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know. No, she filled us with confidence just shortly before we were talking to you.
Fabulous. She's terrific. I mean, she really is.
Yeah.
And what goes well with her and most of these writers is their enthusiasm.
Yeah.
The enthusiasm that they pour in behind the language means that to them they're giving you something special, and I think that reacts. The children will react to that. You know, we've had readings in the shop from time to time, and we had Children's Day in the shop from time to time. I was an Irish language writer. Read some short stories, read some stories, and it's fun. It's fun. The kids enjoy it because they see the writer doing the speculation and all the rest, and doing all the actions, and talking to them, ask again and mail. So, you know, it's a great help that way. And there has been, and there's no doubt about it, but there has been a growth in Irish language books, and it's growing all the time.
Yeah, but I'm very interested in knowing that there is a growth in Irish language books. So it's not just Peg that's out there in Irish Irish language.
There's a lot more than Peg. And now you get a lot of stuff for infants, or young babies, 3, 4, 5, or young babies and more than babies, that's it. But these books are very, very colourful. They're like, you know, they're very colourful. They tell very short stories very quickly, a bit of fun. And there's great fun. I mean, I have great fun in reading some of these to my grandchildren.
And
they don't.
so your grandchildren now, just because you're a prime example, you have a love for books, and I've seen it going through. I've seen it across the whole of your family. There's just, it's like you breathe books. You don't live without a book. You know, it's like your way of life. It's everything. And how then? I don't know if your grandchildren are in the English stream of schools or in the Irish stream of school, but if you read an Irish book to them, can you hold their interest as equally
well? At the moment, it's very slow. I have three. Well, I have one, and Andy's she's only 2.5.
Oh, she's tiny.
Yeah, so she's listening all the time when I'm talking to her brother Frankie, who is in Closhdignog or Scullignog.
Yeah, okay.
As is my Emily. And in actual fact, Emily was in the house here a couple of days ago, and I was reading to her in Irish. She didn't understand much. That's not a bad thing. I mean, I don't need to force her to understand everything. All I need her to do is that Gramps, as they call me, is reading them a story.
Yeah, they just want the connection.
They just want that connection, and if that connection comes and has a real feel behind it, then it's going.
I can understand now what you're saying about even listening to the radio. If you turn on the radio and you're almost hearing it through osmosis, you know, you're taking it, you're learning it. Yeah. It's filtering through. And the same thing is happening for you now with the grandchildren. The same thing is happening, but you're adding an extra element to that because they love you. They love the sound of your voice.
I hope so.
They do. You're very good. You know, you're very kind to them. I've seen you in action, but they love you. And they love being around you, and they love the sound of your voice. So for you to speak in Irish, read a story in Irish, they're going to, I suppose, take more of that on board, but they're also going to have that emotional connection to it as well.
Emotional connection, yeah. And I think the emotional connection is nearly as important as me reading to them and then understanding the word.
Yeah.
The fact that you said that I'm the grandfather and I read to them.
Yeah.
You will notice, you in particular in English, but if you're talking to a young teenager whose family read, parents read, you will find them much more articulate. You will find them much warmer. You will find them much more more willing to listen to you and listen to what we're talking about, books and all the rest of it. You will also find, and this is what I tell kids all the time, even at the young age of 6, 7, or 8, that if they do start reading early, whether it's in Irish or in English, and no matter how bare the Irish is, how small how young the Irish is, but if they start reading at a young age, they will continue with that for the rest of their life. Even if they go away from the Irish language, they'll still be part of it. And what they'll also find, which I think is a very important element of it in today's world, is that when they sit down to do their major exams, albeit the Leaving Cert in particular, they will have two advantages. One is they will have word power.
Yeah.
The second one is they'll know how to use that word.
Yeah.
So that when they're doing a question or answering a question, whereas the person who doesn't come from that type of background will be slow to put words together, sentences together. The person who has the background in books, whether in Irish or in English, be quicker into the market and will be much more comfortable with their subject.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. Yeah. I can't object to that in any way, shape, or form. That is as true as it gets. It is really. I have that experience myself. You know, it's just a natural thing for you to use your words. You know, it's just as natural as breathing. Yeah.
And they become easier. You don't. Well, you do. It doesn't all happen that way. And it's not all roses, you know.
Yeah.
And there are glitches, but you have a much better chance of responding. And I remember I was invited up to Scaligio or to Salerno first years, and this was in English particularly we were talking about, and I gave this story to them. And I think the teachers were in some shock after. I said, Jesus, that's it. I mean, that's what it is those two things, is being able to say something and being fluent in what you're saying. You know, they're the two things you're looking for.
Yeah.
And reading will incur that experiences in a way up to now that technology hasn't. Technology will get there eventually. That's obvious. But at the moment, it's still in neutral.
Yeah. And to be articulate is a very strong place to be in any interview for a job, in conversation, debating a point in situations, to be able to...
you hold yourself. I mean, that will also help you hold yourself the way you should be holding it.
Yeah. Ross, did you want to say something there?
No, I just wanted to ask you just, you know, if if someone who wanted to get back into the Irish language came into your shop and asked you for a book recommendation, what would you suggest?
That's a question now, Jez, for you. What would you suggest if someone came into your shop?
Listen, I remember talking that situation. I will always say, if I am picking books if I'm asked to select kids, I'd have a damn good look at the parents first.
Okay.
And then I will try and watch the child or the kid or young boy or girl and bring them to the bookshelves if I can. I know this sounds a bit idyllic, but this is the way you do it. And literally kind of go down the shelves and say, watch the eyes of the child or the mien of the child, to use French word, when you present him or her with the book. And it's important to see because there will be a reaction, there will be a physical reaction, and there will be a smile. Now, they will naturally go to the big heroes and the ones that their cohorts are all talking about and dealing with and all the rest of it. But ever so often, you will find the individual book that suits the individual person. And that's really for me is what book selling is all about, or should be all about. It's not the bestsellers. It's not kind of ones that are getting all sorts of prizes. It's the relationship between a child and a book.
The first book, when you say that, the first book that really, when I saw it, it just, I kind of, I don't know, a light shone from me was Run to Earth.
Yes, by Thomas Cochrane.
Yeah, I just love that book.
Was that the first in the series?
Yeah.
That was
and then Run Wild, Run Free was another one that he had. But the first time I saw that book, I've read all the books. I read all the books, but it was the first one that really connected to me because I was so connected to nature myself as a child. I wasn't really. I had one foot in the city and one foot in the country because Dad had horses and we were always around horses, and after school straight out to the horses, and we were in the country all the time. We were seeing the foxes and the badger and everything else like that. So this was a book that I think it lifted me up the minute I saw it, you know, and it was the game changer for me. So I can see what you're saying.
If this podcast, as far as I'm concerned, results in one child finding one book, and it's worth it.
Yeah.
And I'm not being dramatic or anything. That's the fact of it. Yeah. So it's so if I'm walking down the rows of shelves, whether it's young kids, teenagers, or whatever, now we have to get a conversation started. I've got to watch the person when I'm presenting with the book, because that's the all-important moment. I mean, that literally is all-important moment. As I say, when people say to me, what will I do to get my children reading? I say, it's quite simple. You leave the books around the house and you read. Not the books, but you read. And I says, one day the child will look at you reading and see it's important that you're reading all the time. And then there's a book on the table, and the magic is they'll open it. If they open it, the magic begins. If it doesn't, it's never going to anyway. You have to accept that sometimes.
Isn't that a good one? Because my father is an avid reader. Everybody thinks, how is he? He's an avid reader. Unbelievable the amount of books he reads. But I noticed one of my brothers was never into reading at all. But as an adult, because Dad had books here, there, and everywhere, he's after now becoming an avid reader himself as an adult, you know. But he just started picking up the books that Dad had read, you know. As an adult, though, not as a child. He never did that as a child. But
and Ross, one of the things I would say to you in terms of your MA material and all the rest of it is that frequently children kind of will read and then stop reading. And you know, they'll move away from it. They won't look at a book for 2 or 3 years. And I get parents that get worried about this. I says, don't worry, it'll come back. It'll happen. And its own time, the child's own time. When the child is ready for it, then it'll happen. And then it'll stay forever. And I've seen that happen to my own kids when they were growing up. 2 of the kids stopped reading altogether for 3 years. 2 or 3 years. And just left them, just leave them alone.
And indeed, you know, I had that experience myself. So I was an avid reader up until around 12, and then I went away from from reading for a few years, and it's only recently that I've started reading for pleasure again, as opposed to having to read for educational purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's pleasure. It's pleasure as well. You got to remember that this is something you enjoy. This is something you have to enjoy, and it has to be almost spontaneous.
So if we want somebody to, if somebody wants, as Ross was saying there earlier, if somebody wants to come into your, want to get back to the Irish language as an adult even, and they come into your shop and they say, I'm trying to kind of start reading Irish now. I've been listening to the radio, and where do I start? Like, at what level do I start? Like, I don't even know.
That's a massive question. Really, the only thing I can do there as a bookseller is guide them in a general direction. You know, Brendan Kennelly once had a terrific article in the Sunday Independent on somebody walking into a bookshop. It was a page-long article. We had it hanging in the shop and somebody stole it, and it was terrific. But what he said was that, and I've seen it happen so often, somebody comes into the shop and they start to look at the books. This is not just Irish, this is everything. They start looking at the books and going through the books, and suddenly they stop. Just stop.
Yeah.
And they take a book out and they look at it for a few minutes and they'll put it back. I know my heart and soul that they're going to wander around the book now for another bookshop for maybe 20 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. But they will always come back, and that's the book they're going to take.
Okay.
It's almost decided for them.
Yeah.
And the curious thing about it is that when they take the book off the shelf, they never open the front. They'll always go from the back. You ever seen people taking a book off the shelf and taking from the back? They'll stop at the paragraph here, the paragraph there, and then go to the title page. And at that point, there's no argument. I mean, they have to buy it. That's it.
Yeah.
Job
it's a done deal. Yeah.
Done deal.
Yeah.
But it's to explore that and then to kind of find other areas out of that. That's where the fun is. I like
the way that it's all about what flows. There seems to be a flow in this conversation.
Barriers are no good. If you're fighting a book, and I can fight a book. I fight Dostoevsky all the time. God damn it, you know, because the terminology is so foreign to me, and the names of the people are so foreign to me. It's too much of an effort to try and keep in touch with them.
Yeah.
You know, I just finished Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, and that was a mountain to climb. No, all seriousness. Come down to the side. And then there's a new book coming out by Colm Tóibín, and I had the pleasure of getting the advance proof copy of it. It is stunning because it's all about Thomas Mann. It was just pure coincidence. But these coincidences, as you put them, happen more often than you realize.
Yeah.
Which is one of the great joys of it.
Well, I'm just, because you're Des Kenny of Kenny's Bookshop. How do Kenny's do this? How do they keep the how do they keep the fires burning? How do they inspire the next generation? Because I remember when I was a child going into Kenny's in town, and your mother used to sit in the shop and she'd be reading books. And I was always terrified by her, because when she looked across, she looked through you. Like, I'm not guilty of anything. I didn't do anything. I'm just standing here. But she was I would imagine she was quite a powerful figure in your lives as children.
Yes. Well, both father and mother. I mean, they were a team together, a total team together. And they just spoke. I actually can never remember them talking about anything else but books, or was involved in the boys' club, and my mother was involved in the girls' club and in the Common Hall, and are talking about those. But they were the conversations.
Yeah.
We frequently had writers and painters to dinner growing up, and of course that added the information, knowledge, you know, etc., etc. And Seamus Heaney was regular. I mean, we met Seamus regularly. John McGartin was in regularly, you know. Of course, when you're in that sort of thing, it becomes natural. It becomes like you and horses, for example, to give another example.
You just,
if I saw a horse, I didn't know he has a nose or something like that, run like hell, you know. So, but you know, so it's kind of a sort of thing that's inbred in us.
Yeah.
I tell the story, and this is a true story. If you bear with me, when I was about 5 or 6, I'm not sure what age I was, and you'll find out why in a minute. I went to Scolarsa, the Irish language school.
Mm.
My older brother Thomas was in the jazz at that point. In those days, you went home at lunch. You went home to lunch at lunchtime, at midday, 1 o'clock. And Thomas used to have to collect me and bring me out home, etc., etc. We lived in Kings Hill in Salthill at the time, just up at the top of the hill there. And we were close to home one day, and I don't know what I had in my hands, and I had something in my hands, and they got away from me out on the road, and I ran out after. And of all things, a Nissan's van came over the hill and nailed me. And I was unconscious for, I don't know, I was in a coma apparently. I've never been told how long.
Mm.
But when I woke up, the first thing I can remember in my life is this man walking towards me. And in his hands, I instinctively knew he was my father. Why? I don't know.
Mm.
Instinctively knew he was my father. And in his hands were oranges and books. So my first visual memory is of books.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suppose in our house we grew up and there were books on the stairs, under the stairs, around the stairs, up the stairs. And if you didn't move, you might get shelved. That sort of thing, you know. So, yeah, so it was that kind of a house. And Father would, you know, in Kings Hill, I remember Father back in the car down on a winter's evening, unloading a load of books from the car into the sitting room where he would catalogue them later. And we were all gathered around them. And of course, what we were trying to do is trying to get the book we wanted to read before Mother saw it, in case she applied for it, and bury it upstairs, you know. And maybe one we shouldn't be reading either at the time. And you know, and it was great. I mean, that's the way it was. Books were a moving part of our feast. It was our daily bread almost.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have an affinity, such a strong affinity with books.
And I've spoken to Sarah in the shop, and it's like she breathes books. It's like it's in her as well. You can see how it's coming down the generations.
As you used to say in the old days, it's in her waters.
Yeah. It's there, and it's a fantastic thing to have. It's an incredible thing to have, and long may it last for future generations. You know?
One of the greatest enjoyments I used to have when I was in Paris was going down along the book in East and the Seine, because where I lived was in central Paris. I was lucky enough, and just to look at the books, and you know, I rarely bought because the French was either too strong for me or I had no real interest, and I was doing a different thing at the time anyway.
Yeah.
But just the pleasure of going down, and I'm sure the bouquinistes themselves probably thought I was stealing the books or something, you know.
Yeah.
But it was that was the pleasure, and going to the second-hand bookshops around the CCM. You know, that was it. I could never afford that in there. Occasionally, I got an Emile Zola paperback for maybe €2 at the time, or 2 francs at the time, 10 francs at the time.
Yeah.
Or I'd pick up a few French things like that. Georges Simenon was another one I would pick up because they were relatively accessible to me in French, and that's how I built my knowledge of French, my ability in French by reading.
And I suppose that's what we want to kind of say to people who are listening to this podcast series. You know, there are books out there that are accessible to you in the language that you want to speak.
Yes, there are.
And it's just a matter of working your way through the bookshelves and finding the one that resonates best.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say fairly strongly is that don't be frightened by books.
Yeah.
Yeah, people says, I never handle that. That's too big for me.
Yeah.
You never know. You genuinely never know. And, you know, just taste it. I mean, even if you don't like it, just taste it. You know, it's curious. I always think that with regards to poetry, for example, if somebody's reading a collection of poetry, and the mind might go into total neutrality, just neutral, just reading words and words and words and words. Then all of a sudden, they'll hit a line that will hit them straight between the eyes, and the book is worth just that line.
Yeah, I've been there. Des, it's been wonderful talking to you. Our interview is now coming to a close, unfortunately. Our time is running out.
I did most of the talking, so my
that's what we wanted. That's why we had you here. We wanted to listen. That's why you're here, and it's great to have you. And thanks very much for being part of the Scripture Story podcast series. I hope we can talk to you another time.
Sure,
another podcast series, hopefully along the way. You might pop in.
I might be more au fait with technology at that point.
Oh no, you did very well today. Thank you very much, Des. I really appreciate you being here.
Bye, Ross.